It was supposed to be a fun hiking trip. It almost killed us both. My best friend Jackie and I were hiking the Appalachian Trail when she suddenly screamed and jumped back from the fallen log. The snake slithered away into the underbrush and disappeared before I could identify it. She was gripping her calf, and when she pulled her hand away, there were 2 small puncture wounds leaking blood. Jackie said it might have just been a harmless rat snake because she didn't hear a rattle, but her voice was shaky, and we both knew plenty of venomous snakes don't rattle before striking. I checked my phone but had 0 bars, which wasn't surprising since we were 6 miles from the parking lot. Jackie seemed okay at first, just shaken up, and we cleaned the wound with water from my bottle and wrapped it with the bandana from her hair. She said it didn't hurt that bad, maybe a 3 out of 10, and we started heading back toward camp, moving faster than we'd come. I kept telling myself we had time, that even if it was venomous, we had maybe an hour or 2 before things got bad. Jackie was talking about how this would be a crazy story to tell everyone, but then she said her leg was starting to tingle, like pins and needles spreading upward from the bite. I told her it could be psychological, but picked up our pace because I remembered reading that you had to get anti-venom fast, that every minute counted. She was keeping up fine, but then said the tingling had turned into burning, and when I looked back, she was limping. The area around the bite was swelling, angry red spreading up her calf like spilled wine. My stomach dropped because that meant venom was moving through her system, and we were still 5 miles from help. Jackie tried to joke, saying, "At least if I die, I'll die with a good tan," but I could hear the fear underneath. She had to stop to catch her breath, and that's when I really started to panic because Jackie ran marathons. She never got winded. She said her chest felt tight, and when I felt her pulse, it was racing like crazy, way too fast. The swelling had reached her knee, and I knew we were running out of time, that we needed to move faster, but she was getting worse. I tried my phone again, nothing, and Jackie's vision was going blurry. She grabbed my arm for support, and I could feel her shaking. She was sweating through her shirt even though it wasn't that hot, and her skin felt wrong, clammy and cold like she'd been swimming. Then she doubled over and vomited into the bushes, and when she looked up at me, her lips had no color. She said, "I think it was venomous," and I wanted to scream because of course it was. Look at her. But instead I just helped her walk. Her boot was cutting into her ankle from the swelling, so I loosened it, but her whole foot was puffy and wrong-looking. She was leaning on me hard now, each breath sounding labored, and I kept calculating how long it would take to get help, even if we reached camp right now. The drive to the hospital, whether helicopters could land here. Jackie's words were starting to slur when she said her tongue felt weird, and I could see her struggling to swallow. The numbness was spreading up from her foot, and she kept apologizing for slowing us down, which made me want to cry because this was Jackie, who'd held my hair back when I got food poisoning on spring break and driven 5 hours when my dad had his heart attack. Her eyes started rolling back, and she said she was seeing double, and her skin had this grayish color that made her look already dead. When she coughed, there were specks of blood, and I had to fight not to completely lose it. We were only halfway back, and she was deteriorating fast. I tried to run while supporting her, but she was becoming dead weight. Then her legs gave out completely, and I had to lower her to the ground. She was barely conscious, mumbling about being cold even though she was burning with fever, and the swelling was past her thigh, her whole leg grotesque. I kept checking my phone with shaking hands, but nothing. Still 3 miles from camp, and Jackie's breathing was getting these terrifying pauses between breaths. She looked at me with unfocused eyes and whispered, "Tell my mom I'm sorry." And I screamed, "Sorry for what?" But she wasn't responding anymore. I laid her down and ran, sprinting up the trail like I'd never run before, checking my phone every 100 yards, begging the universe for just 1 bar. My legs were burning and I was sobbing, but I kept running because Jackie needed me. Finally, I saw 1 bar flicker on my screen, and I scrambled onto a boulder, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The call wouldn't connect at first, the signal too weak, but then I heard ringing. The operator answered just as I heard something large moving through the brush behind me, heading toward where I'd left Jackie unconscious and alone on the trail. I started screaming into the phone that something was coming toward my friend, and the operator's voice cut right through my panic, telling me to make as much noise as possible. I grabbed every rock I could reach and started throwing them down the trail while yelling at the top of my lungs, my voice cracking from the strain. The crashing sounds in the brush stopped for a second, and then I heard whatever it was moving away, branches snapping as it went deeper into the woods. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone, but I kept yelling random words, anything to keep making noise. The operator asked how long Jackie had been unconscious, and I tried to think, but my brain felt scrambled. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. I couldn't be sure. She asked about the snake bite, and I told her about the swelling that had reached Jackie's thigh, how she'd been throwing up blood, how her breathing had those awful pauses. The operator said I needed to get back to Jackie right away, but to keep making noise the whole time so nothing would come near her. I scrambled down from the boulder, almost slipping on the wet moss, pressing the phone between my shoulder and ear while using both hands to steady myself. My ankle twisted a little when I hit the ground, but I didn't care. I just started running and talking loudly, saying anything that came into my head about the trail and Jackie and how scared I was. The operator kept asking me questions to keep me focused, wanted to know exactly where we were. and I told her about the big oak tree that had fallen across the trail where Jackie collapsed, maybe a quarter-mile past where the stream crosses the path. She asked if I had any landmarks for the rescue team, and I described the white blazes on the trees, the wooden sign at the last trail junction, the rocky section where you have to use your hands to climb. My phone made that awful low battery beep and I felt my chest get tight. Only 12% left and the operator started talking faster. She told me if we got cut off, I needed to keep Jackie on her side so she wouldn't choke if she threw up again, remove any jewelry before the swelling got worse, and use something bright to mark our spot for the rescue team. I was running hard now, my breath coming in gasps, but I kept talking loud enough to scare anything away, telling the trees about my day, about Jackie, about anything. The trail curved and I saw a flash of red through the trees. Jackie's jacket and I ran the last 50 yards so fast my legs felt like they might give out. She was exactly where I'd left her, but her face looked worse, gray like old meat, and I could barely see her chest moving at all. The operator told me to check her pulse, but not at her wrist since it was too swollen, so I pressed my fingers against her neck like she said. It was there, but so weak I had to press hard to feel it, beating way too fast like a bird trapped in a box. The operator walked me through what to do next, and I saw Jackie's hiking boot was cutting deep into her ankle from all the swelling, the skin bulging around it. I untied it and tried to pull it off, but her foot was so swollen it looked like someone had blown it up with air, all purple and shiny. The boot finally came off with a wet sound, and her foot looked even worse without it. The skin stretched so tight I thought it might split. Purple bruises were spreading up past her knee now, these dark lines like someone had drawn on her with a marker, and the bite area itself was turning black. I touched her forehead and it was burning hot even though her lips were blue and she was shaking. The operator asked about her breathing and I counted like she said, only 8 breaths in a minute when it should be more like 16. Rain started to fall, just a few drops at first, but I knew how fast weather changed up here, and we were already cold. I dug through my pack for the emergency tarp, bright orange, thank God, while the operator told me how to set it up without moving Jackie too much. My hands kept slipping on the wet material, and I had to use rocks to hold down the corners since I couldn't stake it properly without moving her. The rain picked up, and I tried to angle the tarp so it would keep Jackie dry, but still let me watch her breathing. The operator said search and rescue was already moving, but they were at least an hour from the trailhead, and then they'd have to hike in to find us. My phone showed 8% battery and dropping, the screen dimming to save power, and the operator was giving me more instructions about keeping Jackie warm and watching for any changes. I wanted to cry, but there wasn't time for that. I just kept doing what she said, tucking my jacket around Jackie's shoulders, checking her pulse every few minutes, making sure she stayed on her side. The rain was really coming down now, making everything slippery and cold, and Jackie's skin felt clammy under my hands. 7% battery and the operator was still talking, telling me I was doing great, that help was coming, that Jackie was going to be okay if I just kept doing what I was doing. Jackie made this horrible choking sound and her whole body went rigid under my hands. The dispatcher's voice got sharp and urgent, telling me to turn her on her side right now, and I wrestled with Jackie's dead weight, trying to roll her over. She started throwing up before I got her fully turned, this awful mix of bile and blood that splattered across the wet ground. I jammed my fingers into her mouth like the dispatcher said, scooping out chunks of vomit while trying not to gag at the warm, sour texture. Jackie's breathing sounded wet and thick, rattling in her chest like she was drowning from the inside. The dispatcher kept telling me I was doing good, to keep her airway clear, when I heard footsteps pounding up the trail. A guy in hiking boots and cargo shorts appeared, took one look at Jackie, and immediately started saying we needed to suck out the venom. The dispatcher's voice got firm in my ear, telling me absolutely not. That was dangerous and wrong. Just ask him to run to the parking lot. The guy said his name was Finn, and kept insisting his uncle got bit once, and they saved him by cutting an X over the bite and sucking it out. I told him the dispatcher said no, just please go get help, guide the rescue team in when they arrive. Finn kept arguing, saying I was wasting time, that every second counted, but I followed the dispatcher's script and firmly told him to go. He finally jogged away, shaking his head and muttering about city people not knowing anything. The rain was really coming down now, cold drops that made Jackie start shaking violently even though she was still unconscious. I pulled her against me, wrapping my body around hers while the dispatcher explained that cold would slow the venom, but we had to watch for hypothermia too. Jackie's skin felt like ice under my hands and her lips were turning blue. Then she just stopped breathing, her chest going completely still, and I screamed into the phone. The dispatcher started counting with me. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, and my whole body was shaking. 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi, and I was pressing my ear to her chest, hearing nothing. 6 Mississippi, 7 Mississippi, 8 Mississippi, and I was sobbing. 9 Mississippi, 10 Mississippi, and then Jackie gasped, this horrible wet sound, and started breathing again. But now there were these long, scary pauses between each breath, like her body kept forgetting how to do it. The dispatcher was saying something about respiratory depression when my phone made that dying beep sound. 5% battery flashed on the screen and the dispatcher talked faster, reminding me to keep Jackie on her side, count her breaths, mark the bite time on her arm. 3% and she was still talking, but the words were cutting out. 2% and I was frantically digging through my pack for the Sharpie I knew was in there somewhere. 1% and the dispatcher said one more thing I couldn't hear before the screen went black. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the Sharpie, but I wrote 2:47 p.m. snakebite on Jackie's forearm in big letters. I kept doing what the dispatcher had said, counting breaths, checking her pulse at her neck, making sure she stayed on her side. Then I heard it, that beautiful thump 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 of helicopter blades getting closer. I grabbed my emergency whistle and started blowing it in 3 sharp bursts, over and over, while waving my signal mirror with my other hand. The helicopter appeared over the trees, circling once, twice, and I was screaming and waving the orange tarp. It hovered for what felt like forever, so low I could see the pilot looking down, but then it started rising again. The trees were too thick, no place to land, and I watched it fly away toward the parking lot, taking my hope with it. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Something big crashed through the brush nearby, and I knew that sound, that huffing grunt that meant bear. I grabbed my water bottles and started banging them together, yelling at the top of my lungs even though my throat was raw. The bear huffed again, closer this time, probably smelling the blood and vomit. I kept banging and shouting until I heard it crash away through the underbrush, my voice completely gone now. I turned back to check Jackie's pulse and her eyes were open, staring right at me but not seeing me at all. She tried to say something but it came out all wrong. Just slurred nonsense like her tongue didn't work anymore. Her eyes rolled back up into her head and she was gone again, leaving me alone in the rain with 6% of her left and no idea if help would come in time. I started talking to Jackie about the night she drove 8 hours straight when my dad had his heart attack. I told her how she held my hand in that awful hospital waiting room while we waited for news. Her breathing caught for a second, like maybe she could hear me through whatever dark place she was in. I kept going, telling her about that time she bailed me out when I got stranded in Richmond with no money. I talked about her 26th birthday when we got matching tattoos, even though we were both terrified of needles. The swelling had reached all the way up to her hip now, and her shorts were cutting into her skin. I pulled out my pocket knife and carefully cut the fabric away before it could cut off circulation completely. Her entire leg looked wrong, all purple and swollen to twice its normal size like it belonged to someone else. Jackie's skin was burning hot even though the rain was coming down harder now and soaking through everything. These angry red streaks were spreading up from the bite like rivers on a map. I recognized what that meant from my wilderness first aid class. Massive infection setting in along with the venom. My water bottle was almost empty, but I poured what was left over her forehead and wet her cracked lips. I'd worry about being thirsty later if we made it through this. Then I heard something that made my heart jump. Voices and whistles coming through the trees. I screamed as loud as I could even though my throat felt like sandpaper from all the yelling. The sounds got closer and I saw flashes of orange through the rain and trees. Search and rescue had found us and I started crying with relief. A guy in an orange jacket dropped down beside us and immediately started checking Jackie over. His name tag said Corbin Waters, and he moved with the kind of confidence that meant he'd done this before. Another rescuer, Elena Torres, was already pulling out IV bags and medical supplies from her pack. They worked fast, asking me rapid questions about when the bite happened and what symptoms I'd seen. Elena tried to find a vein in Jackie's arm, but the swelling made it impossible. She had to put the IV directly into Jackie's neck, which looked horrible. Jackie didn't even flinch when the needle went in, and that scared me more than anything else. Corbin explained we were looking at a 2-hour carryout over rough terrain to reach the parking lot. He said Jackie needed anti-venom within the next hour, or things would get even worse. He got on his radio and called for a helicopter to meet us at a clearing about a mile down the trail. The rest of the team arrived, and they carefully lifted Jackie onto this special stretcher thing made for wilderness rescues. They strapped her down tight with these heavy-duty straps across her chest and legs. 6 people would take turns carrying her, and they assigned me to hold the IV bag up and watch her breathing. We started moving way faster than I thought possible over all the roots and rocks. The team was calling out obstacles to each other and switching who was carrying every few minutes. Jackie's breathing made this awful rattling sound every time the stretcher bounced, but at least she was still breathing. Elena pulled out this small flashlight from her vest pocket and clicked it on, leaning over Jackie while we kept moving. She lifted one of Jackie's eyelids and shined the light directly into her eye, then did the same with the other one. The way she frowned made my stomach twist into knots. She moved closer to Corbin and said something quiet that I couldn't hear over the sound of boots on rocks and everyone's heavy breathing. Corbin's face got this tight look, and he nodded, then called out for everyone to pick up the pace even more. My arms were burning from holding the IV bag up high, but I kept it steady while watching Elena check Jackie's pupils again every few minutes. Each time she looked more worried and I saw her mouth something about swelling to Corbin. The trail got steeper and narrower, forcing us to go single file with the litter tilted at this crazy angle. Jackie's body went completely rigid without warning, every muscle locking up like she'd been shocked. Her back arched against the straps and her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. Elena dropped everything and grabbed Jackie's head with both hands to keep it from slamming against the metal frame. Corbin was counting out loud while looking at his watch, his voice steady but his eyes showing real concern. The seizure went on for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 or 40 seconds. When it finally stopped, Jackie went completely limp again, and this foam was coming out of her mouth. Elena wiped it away with gauze while Corbin radioed ahead about the seizure. The team kept moving, but everyone looked shaken now. We pushed through some thick brush and suddenly the trees opened up into a clearing. My heart jumped because this had to be where the helicopter would land. But then Corbin's radio crackled with bad news. The pilot was circling overhead but said the clearing was way too small and surrounded by trees that were too tall. He couldn't risk trying to land without hitting something. Corbin swore under his breath and told everyone we'd have to carry Jackie the whole way to the parking lot, which meant at least another hour over rough terrain. The disappointment hit me like a punch to the gut, but there was nothing we could do except keep going. We plunged back into the trees, and the trail got even rougher with these huge roots crossing the path every few feet. Jackie made this choking sound and her whole body started heaving. She was throwing up while strapped flat on her back and couldn't turn her head enough to clear it. Elena moved faster than I'd ever seen anyone move, pulling out this suction device that looked like a turkey baster on steroids. She jammed it into Jackie's mouth and started sucking out the vomit while yelling for us to tilt the whole litter to the side. The sound was absolutely disgusting, this wet, slurping noise that made me want to throw up too. But it worked, and Jackie started breathing better, though now there was this rattling sound in her chest with every breath. We kept pushing forward, and my legs felt like jelly from the pace and the stress. The trees started thinning out, and I could see glimpses of sky that weren't blocked by branches. Then suddenly we burst out of the tree line into the parking lot where 2 ambulances sat with their lights flashing. The paramedics from the ambulances rushed forward and started transferring Jackie from the litter to their gurney so fast I couldn't follow what they were doing. They were hooking up new IVs and attaching all these monitors while shouting medical stuff back and forth. Corbin grabbed my arm and started pulling me toward the second ambulance. He said I was showing signs of shock and dehydration and needed to get checked out too. I tried to argue that I was fine, but my legs gave out and proved him wrong. They helped me into the back of the ambulance and made me lie down while they took my vitals and started an IV in my arm. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and sharp turns that made my stomach roll. At the emergency room, they wheeled Jackie away immediately while I got parked in a curtained area. A doctor named Brianna Chase came in looking all business with her white coat and clipboard. She started explaining that Jackie needed anti-venom right away, but it was super expensive and could cause its own bad reactions. Some guy in a suit showed up with a stack of papers, his name tag saying Walker Hogan, hospital administrator. He said since Jackie couldn't sign anything herself, they needed her next of kin to give permission. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely work my phone, but I managed to call Jackie's mom. She answered on the 3rd ring, and I had to tell her what happened while Dr. Chase took the phone to explain the medical stuff. Jackie's mom was sobbing so hard she could barely talk, but she gave verbal consent over the speakerphone. She kept saying she was driving from 3 states away and asking if Jackie would be okay. Dr. Chase wouldn't promise anything except that they'd do their best. They rushed me to Jackie's room where a nurse named Natalia Glass was already hanging bags of antivenom on the IV pole. She explained she'd be watching Jackie super carefully because some people have bad reactions to the antivenom itself. The medicine started dripping into Jackie's veins, and Natalia kept checking all the monitors every few seconds. Everything seemed okay for maybe 5 minutes, then all these alarms started screaming at once. Jackie's blood pressure had dropped to something dangerous, and Natalia was suddenly moving at warp speed. She yelled for Dr. Chase, who came running with 2 other nurses. They pushed a bunch of medications into Jackie's IV, while Natalia called out numbers from the monitors that kept getting worse. Dr. Chase was barking orders, and someone brought in this crash cart with the paddles for shocking people's hearts. They got Jackie stabilized after what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. Dr. Chase pulled me aside and explained this was going to be a long process with lots of ups and downs. The swelling might take weeks to go completely down, and there could be permanent damage to the tissue in her leg. She said Jackie was lucky to be alive at all given how much venom she'd gotten and how long it took to get treatment. A park ranger showed up with a notebook and started asking me about exactly what happened. I realized while talking to him that I never actually saw the snake clearly, just movement in the leaves. He nodded and said, based on Jackie's symptoms and where we were hiking, it was almost definitely a timber rattlesnake. The ranger wrote that down in his notebook and left while I slumped into one of those plastic waiting room chairs. My clothes were still damp from the rain and I was shaking from exhaustion, but couldn't leave until I knew Jackie would be okay. The TV in the corner played some cooking show on mute, and I watched people make pasta while nurses rushed past in the hallway. Every time someone in scrubs walked by, I jumped up thinking they had news about Jackie, but they just kept walking. Around midnight, I dozed off with my head against the wall and woke up when my phone buzzed with a text from Jackie's mom saying she was 2 hours away. I went to the vending machine and got a coffee that tasted like burnt water, but at least it was warm. The waiting room filled and emptied 3 times through the night with other emergencies coming and going. A kid with a broken arm, an old man having chest pains, a woman who'd been in a car accident. I kept checking my phone for the time and watching the door to the ICU where they'd taken Jackie. My legs were cramping from sitting so long and I walked circles around the waiting room to stay awake. Dawn came through the windows and made everything look gray and washed out. A nurse finally came out around 7 in the morning and told me Jackie was stable but still critical and they were monitoring her closely. I asked if I could see her, but she said not yet. Maybe later after the doctors made their rounds. Jackie's mom burst through the emergency room doors an hour later looking like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Her hair was messy and her eyes were red from crying the whole drive. She grabbed me in the hallway and we held each other while she sobbed into my shoulder. She kept saying thank you for saving Jackie's life over and over. But I felt sick because if I'd been faster or made different choices, maybe Jackie wouldn't be fighting for her life. The doctor came out and explained that Jackie was responding to treatment, but they were watching for complications like kidney damage from all that venom. 2 days dragged by with me and Jackie's mom taking turns sitting in the ICU during visiting hours. Jackie had tubes everywhere and machines beeping constantly, and her leg was wrapped in bandages from hip to ankle. On the third morning, her eyes fluttered open while I was holding her hand, and she squeezed back weakly. She couldn't talk because of the breathing tube, but her eyes focused on me, and I could see she recognized me. Her mom started crying again, and the nurse had to remind us to stay calm so we didn't upset Jackie. The swelling in her leg was going down, but it still looked huge under the bandages, and the surgeon came in to explain they might need to operate to relieve pressure in the tissue. He wanted to wait one more day to see if the swelling would go down more on its own first. That night, Jackie's leg measurements actually improved, and by morning, the surgeon decided surgery wasn't needed after all. They removed the breathing tube, and Jackie croaked out that her throat hurt, but at least she could talk. Over the next week, they moved her to a regular room and started reducing her pain meds. She kept more of her leg tissue than they originally thought possible, though she'd have scars forever. 3 weeks after the bite, I drove her to her first physical therapy appointment in my car. The therapist helped her stand between parallel bars, and she took 5 steps with a walker while gripping the rails. She made a weak joke about 5 steps being nothing for someone who ran marathons, but we both had tears running down our faces. The next week, I signed up for a wilderness first responder course at the community college. When I walked into the first class, the instructor turned out to be Elena from the search and rescue team who'd helped save Jackie. She remembered us and used Jackie's case as an example during the snakebite treatment lesson. Jackie and I ordered a nice card online and sent it with a $1,000 donation to the search and rescue team to thank them. Corbin wrote back a few weeks later saying they were using Jackie's case in their training scenarios now because it showed how fast snake venom could work. 6 weeks after everything happened, Jackie asked me to drive her to the trailhead parking lot. We sat in my car looking at the trail entrance where other hikers were heading out with their packs and poles. Jackie said maybe she'd hike again someday, but not yet. Not ready. I held her hand while we watched people disappear into the trees, and I kept thinking about how differently our trip had ended compared to what we'd planned. That's the story all wrapped up. I'm so glad you were here for it, because it makes sharing these moments worth it. Hopefully it added a little brightness to your day. Subscribe if you'd like to keep spreading that feeling together.